I would like to begin today with a social experiment of sorts. The images displayed above are those you would find on any ordinary social media page, with one slight twist. They were all found under a specific hashtag. What comes to mind? Off the bat, I'm sure you would say diet, exercise, maybe even weight loss. Naturally, it isn't an incorrect assumption. The images evidently paint a picture glorifying the extremes of dieting and exercise. The only problem is that, unfortunately, it was none of these. It was health. But do you notice how each picture points towards a stereotype? An ideal? In reality, these conventions about the so-called meaning of health were not always as prevalent in our society as they are today. It all started at the very beginning of the 20th century, wherein diet culture began to take a more recognizable shape. Our scientific understanding of the calorie suddenly became a measure of the energy stored in food, entirely set apart from what we knew of it before. The simultaneous introduction of weighing scales stimulated a familiar mindset of monitoring our weight and our figure. Now, it wasn't always about weight loss. It was more linked to a follow-the-crowd kind of mindset, which is where invariably the idea of health formed a harrowing link with physical ideals. Thus, by no fault but our own, did we inculcate the ideologies of generations with an obsession over ideal body types, bringing about an unparalleled era of change that was unfortunately not for the better. Let's examine these physical ideals, shall we? In the early 1900s, a voluptuous S-shaped figure on women was celebrated. This quickly morphed into a thin, boyish physique in the 1920s. A mere 10 years later, an entirely different fixation on the hourglass figure was popularized. The 1940s were all about a tall, strong, military-inspired look. And in the 50s, we were back to the hourglass. Fast forward to a decade later, and a tall, thin supermodel body type was all the rage. The 1970s encouraged women to pursue a thin body with a larger bust. A sudden craze with athleticism and nutrition in the 1980s then fueled the circulation of a toned, athletic body type. Lastly, beauty standards then gave way, once again, to the supermodel ideal, in the 1990s, all the way to the 2000s. Each successive change, so distinct and intricate that every one was capable of fundamentally altering our ideals of women's bodies, cannot be described as anything but a paradigm shift. A circumstance so rare, it is said to occur once, maybe twice in a century. So why exactly is it that, in the health and fitness industry particularly, this phenomenon was able to occur 10 different times in 10 different decades? Why was this industry specifically, for the entirety of the 20th century as we've seen, so distinctly characterized by them? The harsh truth is that we were conditioned to believe that certain body types were an allegory of health and abundance. We were conditioned to believe that a woman's body was a synecdoche for her power, her wealth, her social status. We were conditioned to believe that without these physical ideals, our fickle understanding of health would entirely disintegrate. Outward appearances don't always depict reality, however. Let's take the example of women in England during the early 1900s. Corsets and crinolines were used to physically mold bodies into what society deemed acceptable, the aforementioned S-shaped figure. The corset became a hallmark of beauty, of power, of health, and of wealth. And thus, as fact and fiction began to blur, there began a sudden infatuation with attaining this particular body type. But its repercussions, they were endured in silence. Diminished lung capacity, deformed ribs, and even heart palpitations are part of an endless list of harrowing conditions women had to tolerate under the pressures of social stigmas around any other body type. And so began the 20th century. So began 10 decades of fundamentally altering our ideals of women's bodies within simply a matter of years, almost on a whim. Evidently, we do not remain in the 20th century. However, the fact remains that we did not forsake these practices as we left behind those acutely distressing few decades. No, these mannerisms continue to stay rooted in our society, wherein we, 100 years later, continue to remain in the confines of a mindset driven by a framework of biases and misconceptions. Take a look at the images above. The advertisements evidently portray the blatant propagation of the coveted Gibson girl stereotype in the early 1900s. Compared to these more contemporary prompts, encouraging people to stay healthy, it's effortless to say that the framework of ideals and conventions that was so incredibly prevalent in our society then does not exist in our world as of now. And yet, as they have been for the past century, the line between health and wellness and a profit-driven beauty industry continues to blur. Let's take a closer look. Both images simply follow the latest trends in health and fitness, home workouts and Pilates respectively. It was only a decade ago when people celebrated high-intensity interval training and something known as barefoot running. While somehow we have moved past fixating explicitly on a certain ideal, are these trends not inherently propagating the same mindset? The former encourages a toned, muscular body type, and those from 10 years ago, a slimmer, more lean one. So I propose this. Has our society really been purged of this obsession? Or have we simply found better ways to mask it? The truth is that the influence of social media, celebrities, and toxic fitness culture has cultivated a society in which even today, it's impossible to escape the mental conditioning within us to strive for an unattainable paragon of health. A compulsive obsession with not only body ideals, but striving to achieve them as quickly as possible has continued to fuel an era wherein fitness fads and diet crazes continues to dictate the way people form their understanding of health. The allure of quick fixes, alongside comparisons with edited bodies online and on social media, has and continues to string along individuals unfortunately deluded by the latest trends. Let's take an example that some of you here might just be familiar with. The COVID-19 lockdown was a time that popularized the idea of glow-ups more than anything else. A time of such crisis was further worsened by an increase in depression, anxiety, with body image issues skyrocketing. During this time, a recognizable name rose to popularity: Chloe Ting. She had her social media breakthrough following August 2019, where her Get Abs in 2 weeks and 2-week shred challenge began to go viral, the former of which has over 550 million views as of today. Numerous other fitness influencers began propagating similar quick fix workouts, as Chloe Ting began to top YouTube charts worldwide across the US, UK, and Asia. Now, unknowingly, Chloe Ting had brought about significant reforms to the way people form their understanding of health and fitness that were not necessarily for the better. Even I can easily recall a time when obsessing over these videos, restarting fitness challenges almost every 3 days, a manic desperation to look a certain way began to take shape in my mind. Sooner or later, for tens of thousands of people across the globe, seemingly inconsequential 10-minute ab workouts became the foundation of abiding eating disorders and body image issues. The precarious scales of health and balance having been tipped landed nearly twice the amount of girls in the ER for eating disorders during the pandemic than ever before. It was more than the isolation and the boredom, however. Harvard professor Brian Austin observed that the lockdown gave teenagers ample time to spend on social media, comparing themselves to glow-up posts and edited bodies going viral. This unfortunate exposure profoundly increased the risk of disordered eating and developing body image issues during this period. And so, once again, we had failed to break the distressing cycle of popularizing a norm for people to follow. Once again, we had failed to do anything but fuel social stigmas around body types that didn't align with social conventions. Once again, we had failed to acknowledge the meaning of health beyond abs and 10-minute workout routines, blindly accepting and internalizing such a concept within us. By now, I'm sure you get the gist of it. But for those of you that are still not convinced, let me remind you of a diet craze that went mainstream almost as quickly as it died down: the infamous keto diet. This diet embraced extremes as it thrived in the vortex of social media following the end of the lockdown, cutting out carbohydrates almost entirely to be replaced with proteins and fats. The Kardashians, Megan Fox, and Vanessa Hudgens are a few of the innumerable celebrities that were unfortunately swept up in the haste of this trend. With well-known online presences, they only added fuel to the fire to augment its popularity. Thus, as a result, the consequences of such a diet, such as high LDL cholesterol levels, nutrient deficiencies, and even the irritability and fatigue following this diet, dubbed as the keto flu, were entirely disregarded. Now, despite some undeniable benefits, this diet only continued to propagate an era of rapid weight loss and acutely restrictive dieting, paving the way for future mental health conditions, body image issues, and body dysmorphia that were yet to be unmasked. Now, despite scrutinizing this formidable amount of information, it appears that the crux of the matter is yet to be disclosed: the definition of health. The unfortunate truth, however, is that health simply cannot be defined. Health is not a static theory. Rather, it is an arbitrary concept that is unique to each and every one of us. It's a multifaceted construct that transcends whichever new fitness fad is trending or whichever new diet craze we are fixated on. It is influenced by a wide range of factors, such as our genetic predispositions, our lifestyles, our environment, our culture, and our relationships, making it an ever-evolving phenomenon. The sooner we begin to understand that eating less or eating more, or wearing corsets or doing 10-minute ab routines does not fundamentally make us healthy, the sooner we can begin to realize what health really is. 3 hours of rigorous training and exercise may be healthy for a professional athlete, whereas going on a 30-minute walk every day may be healthy for a busy college student. Therapy or journaling may be healthy for one 30-year-old, whereas yoga or meditation may be mental relief for another. Socializing in a group of 40 may be healthy for one, whereas it may be reading a book alone for another. These examples are getting tedious, so let me simplify it. The only rule to attaining such balance, such health, is to not follow the rules at all. In a nutshell, the theories alluding to a paragon of health are fallacies. Our health is inherently intertwined with our dispositions, our individual ambitions and aspirations, and our personal outlooks, not the conflation of the health and beauty industries. For those of you piqued by the lack of definitions in my speech, I can offer you this. In its elementary form, health is nothing more than a choice. Health is a conscious decision we make every single day to embark on the singular journey, crafted intricately and exclusively for ourselves. In the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Thank you.